Hello everyone, and welcome to one of the best games from the 1959 Candidates Tournament. But before we start with the game, I would just like to announce that the interview with Vasily Ivanchuk rose from 1,000 views to 17,000 views from yesterday. So thank you all for that. I'm glad all of you enjoyed the interview with Ivanchuk, and in case any of you missed it, I will put a link in the description below so you can check it out, as it's really amazing. So this game here, we have a game from round 4 of the 1959 Candidates Tournament. We have Paul Keres with the white pieces against Tigran Petrosian. And their matchup in this tournament is a really exciting one, but I will say something more about this after the game. So the official name of this game on chessgames.com is Crouching Tigran Hidden Dragon, and it's really a perfect name for this game. That's why I used it in the title, as you do have the Crouching Tigran, Tigran Petrosian, waiting for his opportunity to strike, and of course he goes for the Dragon Sicilian, so I think it's really fitting. Keres opens with e4. We have c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight to c6, and the d4. C captures, knight captures, and g6, preparing the accelerated dragon. And we have c4. Here, Keres kind of announces that he wants to go for the Maroczy bind setup, pushing the pawn to b3 and this pawn to f3 and create a very nice pawn structure all across the board. Bishop to g7, we have bishop to e3, knight to f6, and knight to c3. And here we have a move that is quite often happens in positions like this, knight to g4. It seems like black is offering a piece, but of course if you capture the knight, then simply knight captures on d4, as the queen will no longer be protecting the knight on d4. And this is a similar idea that happened in the game, one of my favorite games of all time, Rashid Nejmedinov versus Oleg Chernikov in 1962. Only the difference is that Nejmedinov didn't play c4, he went for bishop to c4 and bishop to b3. So we have queen captures and now knight captures. And now the difference between the Nejmedinov game is that he had a bishop on b3, so his bishop was guarding the c2 square. But now you can see that the knight is threatening to jump to c2 to fork the king and the rook, and here you have to bring the queen back with queen to d1. If you try and defend c2 with something like bishop to d3, then black will have an excellent game after d5, opening up a discovered attack from the bishop to the queen. Now you definitely have to go back, and now after black captures on e4, he breaks your very nice pawn chain in the center, and white doesn't really have anything here. So after this, knight to d4, queen to d1 by Keres, and now comes knight to e6. Queen to d2, again going for this standard setup, queen d2, bishop e3 to threaten bishop to h6 at some point to exchange the powerful dragon. d6, bishop to e2, and now bishop to d7. Keres castles, Petrosian castles, and rook 8 to c1. Bishop to c6, we have rook f to d1, and now knight to c5. We have f3 now, protecting the e4 pawn, and now a5, not allowing Keres to push away the knight from c5 with b4. We have b3, and now comes queen to b6. A weird looking move, placing your queen on b6 in line of that bishop on e3, but even if something like knight to d5 is played, then simply bishop captures, c captures, and queen to b4, offering a trade of queens, and this will be perfectly fine. You can't win a pawn here, because after all the exchanges are done, the rook will be eyeing the a2 pawn, so you're not going to have too much fun playing this position against Tigran Petrosian. So after queen to b6, we have knight to b5 now. And here we have an extremely exciting moment in the game, where Petrosian really shows what a classy, masterful guy he is. Here, Keres is threatening a3 and b4, simply attacking the pinned piece and winning the piece. And it's very interesting how Petrosian takes care of this. He plays rook f to c8, and rook f to c8 is very nice. Because now if you continue with this plan of a3, then simply queen to d8, there is no more b4 idea because the knight is no longer pinned, and you manage to develop your rook. The queen is now back to d8, but the rook is no longer stranded on f8. So this was Petrosian's idea. So after rook f to c8, we have bishop to f1, making room for Keres' queen to go to f2 to pile up on that c5 knight. And now queen back to d8. Again, now the rook is developed and the queen can go back. Queen to f2, and now queen to e8. We have knight to c3, b6, and rook to c2. Queen to f8, maybe preparing ideas like bishop to h6, or maybe ideas like pushing the e pawn, so the queen will be protecting the d6 pawn. Queen to d2, and now comes bishop to d7. Knight to d5, we have rook to b8, protecting the b6 pawn, and now bishop to g5, piling up on that backwards e7 pawn. We have rook to e8 defending, and now comes rook to e1. And here you can never play a move like e6. This would be pretty terrible for black, as after knight checks, bishop captures. After e5, you're left with a lot of weak dark squares around your king, and there's always this problem of the backwards weak d6 pawn, so a player like Keres would definitely convert this advantage into a win. So after this rook to e1 move, rook to b7 by Petrosian. We have queen to f2, and now comes bishop to c6. Queen to h4, we have f6 now. Bishop has to go back, bishop to e3, and only now e6, because now there's no problem of that knight f6 idea, since both the bishop and the queen are guarding the f6 pawn. We have knight back to c3, and now comes rook to d7. Bishop to d4, now f5, and here we have e captures on f5. And also a very interesting moment in the game. What do you do here? Do you play e captures on f5, or do you play g captures on f5? If you go e captures on f5, then bishop captures on g7. You can't capture with the queen because your rook would be hanging on e8. So after king captures, now comes queen to d4 check. King to g8, and now rook c to e2, doubling up on the e file, and white is just better here. But after this e captures on f5, Petrosian decided to go g captures on f5. We have rook to d2, and now bishop captures, rook captures, and now rook to g7. Now Petrosian will use the open g file to attack Keres' king. King to h1, we have rook to g6, preparing ideas like a small rook lift coming to g7, although you can't do it immediately. Rook to d2 was played, but now rook to d8. Of course, you can't go rook to e7 immediately. Your d6 pawn would not be defended anymore. So rook to d8. We have rook e to d1, again pressuring that d6 pawn, and now rook to d7, with the idea of queen to d8, and also at some point maybe rook coming to g7. Queen to f2, we have queen to d8, and now queen to e3. And here we have e5. With ideas of pushing f4, so here Keres pushes f4 himself. So we have f4, e4 now, and knight to e2. And here we have rook d to g7. And if you look at this position, it's not that that white is worse here or anything. It's simply that black's position is so much easier to play. You have doubled rooks on the g file, the queen is ready to jump to h4, you're ready to push the h pawn. This bishop is eyeing that g2 pawn nicely, x-raying it over the pawn, but always knight to d3 will always be an idea. If you capture the knight with your bishop at some point, then you recapture with this pawn, your bishop comes alive. So black ideas that black might use in this game are all fairly clear, and it's very hard to defend a passive position like this with white. So knight to d4, as Petrosian pushed e4, so he weakened the d4 square. Keres immediately takes advantage of this. Bishop to d7, and now comes a3. We have queen to a8 and king to g1. Keres doesn't like the idea that after Petrosian plays knight to d3 and this pawn recaptures, that this g pawn will be pinned due to the queen being on a8, so he will be unable to push g3. We have h5, and now here you really have to find a plan for black. You can't. Keres played rook to b1. If you decide to play something like b4, then indeed you get this knight to d3 move, and after bishop captures, pawn captures, now you have this knight to f3 move. And although it's perfectly fine for white, it's a very hard position to play. So Keres doesn't go for this. He goes for rook to b1, and now h4. We have rook b to b2. Now both rooks are on the second rank, guarding that g2 pawn. And here we have rook to g4. If you play something like pawn to h3, then Keres can simply capture it, queen captures, and there's really nothing black can do to take advantage of this. Rook h7, queen simply moves, and you're not breaking through. So after this rook b to b2, Petrosian has a different idea. Rook to g4. He will now still grab more space and also maybe pile up on this weak f4 pawn. So rook to f2, guarding the f2 pawn, and now comes queen to d8. b4, and now here you can do a couple of things. And it's a very nice position for you to actually check out, maybe even pause the video and try to find Petrosian's move, as it's really a Tal move, not a Petrosian move. If you play something like knight to d3 here, after bishop captures, pawn captures, queen can simply capture, and white is perfectly fine here. There's no real way for black to continue this attack. The doubled rooks on the second rank are guarding this pawn nicely. The knight can always come to f3 and then g5 to block the rooks, so it's not a very good idea for black. So after this b4 move, Petrosian actually plays a Tal move. He plays rook to g3. And what do you do here? Now, obviously, you can capture the rook, or you can move the queen. If you move the queen, then, you know, first you have to check out where do you put the queen, then this rook can move. But if you're going to capture it, it's better to capture it immediately, which is what Keres did. And it's not really that this is a mistake. It just gives Petrosian a lot of attacking chances. So h captures on g3, h captures on g3. And now, this is a classical moment after one player sacrificed some material, where you will have that, maybe you will have one moment to defend properly. And here you have to decide how to defend properly. So, how would you defend in this position? H captures on g3 was played. Petrosian is threatening to capture your rook on f2. He's threatening to play queen to h4 with ideas of queen to h2 checkmate. So, how would you defend? One idea, which Keres missed in the game, was rook to f3. You just want a rook, so you don't want to be up too much material if you're, you know, probably getting checkmated. So after rook to f3, black definitely doesn't want to capture. Queen to h4, threatening queen to h2, but now bishop to e2. Making room for the king to escape, so after the king moves to f1, the queen can come to help out with the defense with queen to g1. And after e captures on f3, knight captures on f3, attacking the queen, also guarding the h2 square, so queen to h8, and now b captures on c5, but this is the idea. Keres might have considered this, but then you have to see that if you capture the knight, you lose the game actually, because of rook to h7, threatening checkmate and opening up a discovered attack from the queen to your rook on b2. So in this extremely complicated position, Keres played rook f to d2. And now he will have some problems. Here Petrosian immediately played queen to h4. The threat, of course, is queen to h2 checkmate. And here he played bishop to e2. Now comes rook to h7. And now there is only one move that will allow you to defend this position with white, but Keres missed that move as well. The move Keres missed was bishop to h5. First you have to give up the bishop, not just give up the bishop, but you have to free the e2 square for your king. So after you give it up, the rook captures now king to f1, and you can escape with the king. But Keres missed this, and after rook to h7 he played king to f1 immediately, with the idea that everything is perfectly fine. If queen to h1, then comes queen to g1 defending, and white is perfectly fine. The knight is still attacked on c5, so you can always capture it. But here, Petrosian actually has a checkmate in 5 moves, so it's a perfect position for you to pause it, you know, try to find Petrosian's move. And it's quite beautiful, because he already sacrificed one rook for the attack, and now comes the punch line. So do pause it, do try to find Petrosian's move. I will give it a couple of seconds, as always. For those of you who were able to solve this, it's you know, a beautiful move. You're an excellent player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here Petrosian played queen captures on f4. this comes with check, and the idea is really simple, but also, the position is so elegant that even a simple idea like this is really beautiful. The idea is simple because you only have to get rid of the queen. You have to deflect the queen from defending the g1 square. So now, if you capture the queen, simply rook to h1 is the immediate checkmate, as the queen can no longer block it with queen g1, and this bishop is preventing the king from coming to e2. And if you don't capture the queen, well, then you really don't have any moves. Simply you move the king. Now black doesn't even have to capture the queen. He can simply play rook to h1 check, and you have to block this either by the bishop, and then you're immediately getting checkmated, or you can give up first the queen and then the bishop, and then it's queen captures on f1 with checkmate. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I really think the title is fitting. Crouching Tigran, Hidden Dragon. If there wasn't for the Tal game against Smyslov that won the Brilliancy prize, there are so many games that that were probably candidates for the Brilliancy prize, but you can't out Tal. So yeah, after this queen captures on f4, Keres resigned the game, and yeah, before I forget, I couldn't find a photo of Petrosian playing against Keres in this tournament, but I did find a nice photo of them. Here it is. Let me just enlarge it a bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, there we go. This is a game from 1963. It was played in the Piatigorsky Cup. Also, you can see Petrosian here with the black pieces and Keres with the white pieces. They're, having a good laugh before their game. So quite a nice photo. There will be a link in the description below if you want to use that photo for something. And for those of you who are maybe new to the 1959 Candidates Tournament or new to this channel, here are the final standings for this tournament. So as you can see, Tal won it. Then we have Keres in second place, Petrosian in third, and then the rest of the players. I'm sure you already know that. But it's very interesting that Petrosian is the only player who had a positive score against Paul Keres in this tournament. As aside from this game that Petrosian won, all the other 3 games were drawn. And it's very interesting that Keres and Petrosian played some 35 games throughout their life, and the result at the end is a draw, because Petrosian won 3 games, Keres won 3 games, and the other how many? 29 games were drawn. So definitely, a great rivalry, and but in this tournament, Petrosian had the upper hand. He had the only positive score against Keres, but in the end, Keres won second place and Petrosian third. So yeah, like I said, I do hope you enjoyed it. I do hope you enjoyed a photo of the two of them, and I would like to thank Locutus the Borg, Vladimir Kozirev, and Amadeus Kosik for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another game from the 1959 Candidates Tournament. See you soon.